And I see a lot of people that struggle with that really struggle with like finding that compassion. And I struggle with it some days. Like I really struggle to be compassionate with myself. If we can find ways to relate to the plants and connect with nature around us so that we're able to really pinpoint how to act and how to respond when we're starting to feel those sensations of not belonging or being out of our depth or spiraling down, like you mentioned, then we will go a long way towards healing.
Welcome to the Herbalist Hour. This is where community gather, merging the power of people and the flowers, the sweet and the bitter to the salty, the sour. Umami, it's time for the Herbalist Hour.
Welcome back to the Herbalist Hour. Today I'm joined by Dr. Elizabeth Guthrie, aka the Trauma-Informed Herbalist. Welcome to the show, Elizabeth.
Thanks. I'm really excited to be here.
Same, yeah. And I got to just say right off the bat, Elizabeth has provided numerous podcast episodes for the HerbRally podcast in the past, so just big thanks for that. So I'm excited to get to know you a little bit more via the interview. So let's start with, how did you get into this whole herbalism thing?
I grew up with a mom and a grandmother that were really into herbs. And I didn't know that you could have a career in it. You know, obviously at the farm, like we had a lot of different herbs that grandmother and mom both kept in their gardens. And it never occurred to me that this could be a profession. My mom was into some of the plant medicines for the chronic illness that she had. And as a matter of fact, between using some herbs and some of the nutrition choices, she was able to alleviate a lot of the chronic pain she was having. So I was really impressed upon by a really early age that there's something to this, like plant medicine works. But it wasn't until I got out of Florence, Alabama. I love Florence, but it's a little smaller area. And in the 90s, you know, not many people were into that in that area. And when I realized getting into my college years, realizing that this is actually, people do this as a career, I got really excited and started pursuing, like, how do you study this? How do you get into this deeper? And it's just been such a powerful thing. And from the trauma side of things, I was a 911 dispatcher as my day job for quite a while. And so that by itself is kind of a form of secondary trauma. And then I became a victim of intimate partner violence. And after that, I started responding differently to some of the natural things. So meditation, certain adaptogens bothered me. And I began to realize like something is off about this. And of course, initially the response was, it must be me. My body must be broken. And it took me a long time to dig deeper into this. And when I finally started to realize it's not that my body is broken, it's that my nervous system is responding differently to the herbs. So now how do I adjust that based on my needs in order to start the healing process again?
Well, I'm excited to delve in more into, say, the polyvagal theory later on. Yes. And your experience with, say, adaptogens versus calming nervines. And I would like to eventually know what kind of herbal protocols you personally follow and some of your personal plant allies, and if you've kind of finally found like a happy medium with some of these herbs you're taking. But can you explain to the audience what exactly is trauma-informed herbalism?
Yes. So trauma-informed herbalism is really it's not as much about, oh, let's fix the person. It's more about understanding how trauma can change somebody's response. Trauma is defined as the response that the body and the brain have after an event that feels overwhelming to that person. So, for instance, I may sit through the same event as you. But my nervous system, based on my past experiences, may actually cause me to feel overwhelmed by the event, whereas you may not have the same past experiences and you may not have the same overwhelm. So then all of a sudden I'm dealing with trauma, residual trauma after the event, whereas you just went, oh, well, you know, water off a duck's back, go on, right? So one of the things that I'm really trying to impress upon people is that people respond to these events differently. They may respond to herbs in ways that we don't expect. when we look at herbs and we look at the way that things normally go, you expect people to have good results from certain adaptogens. You expect people to, feel great after certain nerve veins. And when they don't respond that way, there can be kind of a sense of like, well, you must not be doing something right. But if we understand trauma may be involved in these scenarios, it becomes less about, oh, well, I have a bunch of non-compliant clients, and more about we need to adjust the protocols to help support this person as they're healing and their nervous system is trying to rebalance.
One thing I love about herbalists in general is I feel like we look at individuals as individuals, and
Right.
and it sounds like that kind of comes through a lot in your work, not just with the herbs, but being trauma informed. So I really appreciate that, because we all have our own unique experiences, and I feel like a lot of your work is just based in empathy, which I really love, and it kind of reminds me of when I first started taking blue vervain. It was very effective on me in a positive way. And I'm like, I guess I'm a blue vervain person. And, skullcap never really had that appeal to me. And it kind of reminded me of what you were saying right there. I'm like, oh yeah, certain herbs are better for certain people for whatever reason going on there. But can you explain how trauma affects the body?
So trauma is first and foremost stored in the nervous system. When you're looking at somebody has been through trauma, you are looking at the root cause is in the nervous system. Now, we may have effects in other body systems, which I'll talk about in a minute, but that root is either there's memories, the brain is part of the nervous system, so there may be memories happening, or more commonly, it's stored somewhere deeper in the physical body. And once we recognize that and start to bring in herbs that can support the nervous system, as well as, this is getting a little off the herbalist train here, but getting into some of the somatics work, some of the movement therapies, listening to really what's happening in your body, then you're kind of giving yourself a chance to listen to what the nervous system needs. And so that's where I get into some of the somatic herbalism type work. And of course, my stuff's herbal somatics, but I do a lot of that because it's not just always about, oh, here, take these plants. This is what works based on your energetic pattern. Sometimes it's, here are some plants that could work. Let's listen to what our body is saying and see what we're being drawn to. And so that's a side of it that I think is really important for people to recognize, because when you're dealing with the nervous system, you can have all kinds of wacky symptoms to come up. Some people have pain. Some people have weird tics. Some people will feel dizzy. Some people will feel a sense of anxiousness or depression. There's all kinds of different things that can come up. And so it really does become a lot of the times a matter of listening to your body and seeing what helps. Now, what happens, remember I said the nervous system is the root cause, but there's a cascade of events that then affects things like the digestive system, the immune system. Really any system from there could be affected, but those are the two big ones. And so when we're talking about the parasympathetic nervous system, which we'll get into with polyvagal theory when we get to that point, but stick with me here. Parasympathetic nervous system, a lot of it is related to the vagus nerve. And the vagus nerve kind of runs from the base of your skull down through beside your heart. It controls some of the functions of the heart, and it wanders the whole way down into the digestive system. And that's why it's called vagus, or the wandering nerve. And this nerve is very important when we're talking about trauma and support. And a lot of the times, somebody who's been through trauma, because this nerve wanders the whole way down to the digestive system, there will be digestive components. I mean, even if you don't have trauma, even if you've just been under significant emotional strain, a lot of people have digestive responses to that. So yeah, that's a thing. And then of course we have the connection between inflammation and trauma that's being researched and studied. So there's a lot of interesting. It's not interesting when you're dealing with it, but like from a scientific perspective, like I say that and I'm like, yeah, but then it's like, oh, it's not really, but like it is from a scientific perspective. Sure. it can be really interesting to see these links. And then from a more practical perspective, like some of the stuff that I dealt with and a lot of my clients have dealt with, recognizing that trauma may be part of why this autoimmune issue has popped up can give us another level of things to work on while we're also addressing like what imbalances are happening on the autoimmune level.
Great. Very well said. I just heard you on a podcast yesterday in preparation for the show, and I want to say it was more around the psychology or therapy side. And it was funny. A lot of the episode was you essentially explaining herbalism to the host. And this is called the Herbalist Hour, but I really like to, we could veer away from it. So I'm glad that we're talking more about this side of things. It really is all connected. And like you said, if we're having emotional trauma, we might have, say, diarrhea or constipation or some sort of digestive upset. But well, let's see. I was going to bring up the polyvagal theory next, but actually I am kind of curious what your practice looks like. Are you a practicing clinical herbalist? And how do you kind of throw in the trauma aspect? Because I'm pretty sure you're not a therapist.
I'm not a therapist.
Yeah. So if you're an ND, right? You're a naturopathic doctor? Or?
No, I am. I have a PhD. So my PhD is in natural medicine.
Gotcha.
But I am not a naturopath. That was my original goal.
I see.
I had gone into it planning to become a naturopathic physician. And essentially funds limited our ability to move to Seattle.
Gotcha.
Bastyr. Bastyr was my number one choice. But that's okay. Like, it is what it is. Yeah. So I refocused into a PhD on natural medicine where I was able to write several papers, really kind of get in depth into some of the naturopathic psychology side of things. So my natural medicine degree is in naturopathic psychology. I am a clinical herbalist, but I'm also a registered yoga teacher. And I also have studied somatics and am currently in a professional somatic training program. So my clinic is more a combination of some of the herbalism, some of that like reconnecting people to their body. A lot of the times what I do, a matter of fact, I was just doing a conversation the other day with another interview, and somebody said, so you kind of get people into the zip code, like you find the zip code and then narrow it down through somatics. It was like, yes, that's it. So like, for instance, with you, like blue vervain and skullcap, I probably would have said, let's sit down with both of these plants and let's just give you a minute to see if you're attracted to one of them. Maybe try the tincture of both and see if one of them really resonates with you, listening to your body and your intuition. And you probably would have been, drawn to the blue vervain. And so there's some of that comes into play instead of me just handing somebody a sheet that says, here are the things you need to take. And then, of course, there's yoga and that kind of thing as well.
So you said you moved from a small town. Was it Florence, Alabama?
Yes.
And where are you living now?
I'm in Birmingham. So not like a whole lot bigger, but big enough.
That's a pretty big town, right? 100-some thousand, maybe.
Yeah, it's one of the biggest in the state, but yeah,
I've driven through that town, that city, and I love that area. It's so gorgeous, such a beautiful plant life and everything. And so I take it there's more receptive folks there to this type of healing.
Well, and I would say now in Florence there are as well.
Oh, cool.
But I left Florence at age 15.
Okay.
I went to high school in Mobile, Alabama. And so when I left, that's been, over 15, almost 20 years ago now. And so like when I left at that time, it just wasn't as prevalent. Now, like I've got a lot of friends in Florence that are into it. Eventually I would love to move back there. Cool. But I am happy where we are now. We are in the city limits of Birmingham and we're 5 minutes from the botanical gardens. So like I'm in a very happy place for work.
I love that. Well, why don't we dive into polyvagal theory? So what is polyvagal theory?
Polyvagal theory was created by Dr. Stephen Porges. He is a medical doctor who was, I want to say the first time he noticed it, he was working in a neonatal ICU.
It's a mouthful.
Yeah. So he was working in the NICU, and there were doctors that would watch heart rate variability to determine how resilient the infants were. But then there were other signs, and now I couldn't tell you exactly what they were. Maybe it was heart rate specifically that could indicate whether or not an infant was about to be in trouble. So both of these things, the heart rate variability and the other, I do believe it was like a real low bradycardia type heart rate. Both of these signs of resilience and, impending doom come from the vagus nerve being activated. And so this creates kind of a conundrum, because on one side, it sounds like if the vagus nerve is activated, that means that you're building resilience. On the other side, if the vagus nerve is activated, then something must be wrong. And so he started trying to dig a little deeper to figure it out. And that's how he created the polyvagal theory. Now, a lot of herbalists have heard of sympathetic versus parasympathetic. Sympathetic is fight or flight. Parasympathetic is rest and digest. In the polyvagal theory, sympathetic is still your fight or flight. That is still where you get, like, when you're feeling like you've got to move, you can, the jittery sensations, like in kind of herbal energetics terms, it's adding heat or adding energy to the system. But then from the parasympathetic angle, he breaks it into two pieces, thus polyvagal, right? Multiple vagal. You have your ventral vagal and your dorsal vagal. The dorsal vagal response is that shutdown. It's from kind of an energetic standpoint, the energy has completely left the system. It's a collapse. Whereas ventral vagal is actually where we're trying to get. We are trying to get back to a point where we feel comfortable, soothed, maybe a little bit of an unwinding and relaxing feeling. And then we're able to connect with each other. And the ventral vagal is really where that rest and digest comes into play. When we are in a ventral vagal state, we're in a place where we are more connected to each other, but our physiology is in a state of healing, of rebuilding. Whereas if you're in fight or flight, or if you're in dorsal vagal, there tends to be a lot of survival mode going on, and your body's just trying to get through it. So a lot of the work that I do is helping people recognize when they're going into one or the other, and what herbs and movement medicine call to them in those moments to help to bring that system back into balance, where they can be in the ventral vagal state more often. And that's very simplistic, but that is the general goal.
Yeah. So we were talking about individuals as individuals earlier. Is there any examples of protocols that you could help people get into that sweet spot? Maybe just a story or something like that, because I'm picturing it as you're teaching, and I'm like, but what do you do? How do you get there? So do you have any examples?
I'll use myself as an example,
please.
So when I was I had just kind of gotten out of the intimate partner violence situation, and I started having a lot of physical responses. I ended up in the ER at one point with an allergic reaction. They never could quite figure out what happened. They gave me some EpiPens and said, good luck. That was not a good feeling. And wow. And I was trying to turn to the medicine to help me, like the herbs, like what can I use? Because none of the conventional side of things was really giving me answers. And one of the herbs that I used to use a lot before my trauma was rhodiola. And so I got some more rhodiola and started taking it and started having worse panic attacks. And rhodiola is an energizing adaptogen. And I was in a sympathetic nervous system state. So remember what I said with sympathetic, that's your fight or flight. That's the extra energy. We're adding energy to a system that already has energy. And it was spinning me out even further. So instead, I shifted to some other things like holy basil, which has some adaptogenic properties and is really balancing. And then for a while, I was using some magnesium, which isn't herbs, but the magnesium was really helpful as far as just like helping to soothe the system and kind of allow it to relax back into a place where I could feel a little bit more calm and connected. So it was a very big difference for me where rhodiola was really now it's very helpful because I'm kind of back in a place where I'm a little more balanced. But at the time, it was actually making those symptoms worse. Now, I have clients who naturally tend to fall more into the dorsal vagal collapse side of things, and rhodiola is their best friend. They may have even gone through something very similar to me, but their nervous system and the energies that have occurred in the nervous system have them in a slightly different trauma response. And so rhodiola becomes their friend, and they're able to use that to help kind of bring them back into the ventral vagal state. So it's a lot of that kind of thing. And people who have complex trauma, it gets more complex.
Sure.
So in complex trauma, we have different sources for the trauma. And so depending on what's causing the activation, some people may always go into the sympathetic, some people may always go into dorsal vagal, but sometimes, depending on the person's situation, they may find themselves in sympathetic some days and in dorsal vagal other days. And so that's where it really becomes, okay, let's get you some plans for sympathetic, let's get you some plans for dorsal vagal, and now we're going to really notice what's happening and take it based on what we've got going on.
So you mentioned complex trauma, and I would ask you to define but before we get there, I've heard of something called implicit versus explicit memory, I want to say. And I'm, if I'm remembering correctly, implicit's more like pre-memory childhood trauma. Does that sound familiar? Or for whatever reason, my brain is associating implicit trauma with complex trauma. And I don't know if that's remotely true, or can you speak to any of that or define the complex trauma?
Yeah. So I don't actually know much about those phrases, implicit versus explicit memory. I will say that there is one of the things that is really interesting to me is that when we get into a lot of this type of work with plant medicine and somatics and kind of like bringing together like an honoring of the body's innate wisdom is what it boils down to. Really like allowing ourselves to recognize that like we're going to get through this. And if we connect with what our body is telling us, it will be a little bit of a smoother ride. And there's two different approaches that you'll hear people talk about. That's top-down processing and bottom-up processing. And the phrase top down and bottom up comes from a little bit of an outdated model, the triune brain model. But the idea in top down processing is that we're using the neocortex to logically process through what's occurring. And it's essentially filtering down to our brainstem, to those more primal instincts, the fight or flight, that kind of thing, and using our logic to help soothe what's occurring in the body, which is helpful in a lot of ways. There's a lot of talk therapy that does that, and that's good. But that's one piece. We also need the bottom up processing, and bottom up is kind of the opposite. It's listening to the body, not necessarily trying to understand why it's doing what it's doing, right? Sometimes we know, oh, okay, I'm feeling this sensation and this is why. Sometimes we may not know. It may be something left over from childhood, or like some people are even traumatized as they're being born. If it's a very difficult birth, like the child can hold trauma from being born. And so you're not going to remember that. That's not going to be part of your logic processing. But if we can use things like tapping into that innate wisdom that's in the body through somatics and through connecting with plant allies and finding things that really sing to us, then we are honoring that bottom up processing where we're kind of unraveling some of the blocks that are occurring in the body. And then all of a sudden our thinking becomes clearer. So that's not the same thing necessarily as implicit and explicit memory, but that's kind of the kind of thing that I work with, because I don't have to know what somebody's situation is. I don't have to know their backstory. A lot of the times I have people that come to me who don't tell me anything. Sometimes they'll eventually tell me a little bit about what has happened, but like a lot of people don't, I don't really know what's occurred. And we work with it from that bottom up processing to help them kind of get back into a place where they feel like they can go to that that feeling of I'm safe enough in this moment for my body to relax and be able to heal.
So a lot of your clients are probably seeing, say, therapists along with seeing you to get like a holistic treatment for themselves. I got you. I guess I'm kind of curious about, say, help in extreme acute situations. Do you ever have recommendations for that? Again, I know it's kind of like individualistic, but like, yeah, say you're having a really hard time and you're needing some help and you never feel like anything really works. So you just go down that negative spiral into hell and you're just wanting help. And I know a lot of times it's funny as herbalists, like you're super good at helping other people, but sometimes in the moment it's hard to treat yourself. I'm just curious. Yeah, right. Exactly. So I'm just curious if you have any suggestions for folks struggling in the moment.
Right. So there are several things. First of all, I mentioned holy basil earlier. It's also known as Tulsi. That is by far one of like my favorite herbs for just if somebody's not sure what will help, let's just grab that and see how that does. It has a very balancing effect on a lot of people. The herb itself has a lot of antioxidant properties to it. So, it just tends to be one of those herbs that I grab for first. Flower essences, which in my mind is a part of herbalism. Sure. I don't know if everybody agrees with that, but flower essences can be a really good place as well. There is a Bach remedy. Okay, so this is where I'm about to sound crazy, but it's either distress remedy or rescue remedy.
Rescue remedy is what I remember. Okay. Yeah.
Then distress remedy is the Nature Sunshine version. I was like, gotcha. So rescue remedy is the Bach version. That is really good. A lot of people will use that. They make it in liquid form, but then they also have like these little, like kind of hard pastille type things that you can put under your tongue. Some people really like that. A lot of the times when we are in that kind of downward spiral, there is no top-down approach to logicking yourself out of it.
Totally.
And a lot of the times it's a matter of changing what you're doing in that moment. And I'm saying this as if I'm an expert in changing what I do in the moment, but it is not the case. But I have really made an effort since I was traumatized to recognize when I'm starting to spiral and move to a different room or read a book or go get a tea that's a little bit different. So like I have several teas that I keep. One of my friends, Ruth Shelton, she goes by the Empirical Herbalist. She has a really neat collection of teas. One of her teas, which is the Tulsi tea, so it's got holy basil in it. That's one of my favorite to pull out when I'm starting to spiral. So I almost keep it back until I'm having, like, I used to drink it every day and now I'm like, ooh, but like special occasion tea. Yes. And so I will change the type of tea that I'm drinking. I will change where I'm located. And of course, as many people know, I had long COVID. I'm finally kind of coming out on the other side of it. But for the first few months, when I physically couldn't get up and move very much, I would even just change locations in the room. Like I'd walk a few steps to a different chair to give me a slightly different view. Getting out and walking in nature is so important. There's research now that indicates that the Schumann resonance, which is the Earth's kind of natural resonance, that's created by the thunderstorms. It peaks at certain times of the day, but it usually stays within a certain range. If we can get out into nature and allow ourselves to be around that resonance a little bit more, it actually has impacts on our heart rate variability. And remember back to the beginning, I mentioned heart rate variability has to do with the vagus nerve and getting back into that ventral vagal state. So there's a lot of little things that people can do. I know that didn't really give a whole lot of plants, but like there are a lot of adaptogens that can be helpful. And David Winston has that wonderful book on adaptogens and nootropics and nervines. And that's a book that if somebody really wants to dig into it, I recommend, because there are so many different options. There's Asian ginseng, there's ashwagandha, there's and now I'm not sure if shatavari is officially defined as an adaptogen by David or not, but like there's all these different plants that are available And if you can go and read and understand a little bit more about each one of them, and then spend a little time connecting with them. If you can't go buy them all, then do what our ancestors did and spend a few moments just connecting with that ethereal, either if you want to call it a plant spirit. I tend to think of them as like a conscious plant spirit, but maybe you're just seeing it more as like a resonance, a vibration, to see if it is aligning with your vibration, whatever you want to do with it. A lot of the times we can pick out really good herbs for ourselves when we allow ourselves a chance to really connect like that.
Great suggestions. Yeah. And it's hard to go into nature and continue to be in a bad mood. I mean, right. I notice every time I go out and say the woods, just instantly calming. So very good. I know you also dabble in aromatherapy. I'm curious, how can aromatherapy help in the moment? And I know like there's a strong correlation between memory and scent and whatnot. And I want to say in one of the podcasts I heard you were talking about, if you identify lavender, even though it's a relaxing nervine, if you identify lavender with a highly stressful moment in your life, maybe that's not the best scent to be going with. But how can aromatherapy help people with trauma and whatnot?
Yeah. So I am a certified aromatherapist as well. And one of the things that I've really gotten into is understanding more about the polyvagal theory and aromatherapy. And as a matter of fact, in season 2 of my podcast, which will be coming out in the next few months, I will be digging more into the aromatherapy side of things, since my second book is Essential Oils for Trauma. But one of the things that I tell people is, if you're looking at essential oils, which ones do you like the scent of? Like which ones are your favorite scents right now? And that can change. Like I have things that I used to really like and now I'm not as crazy about, and vice versa. But like right now, what are the scents that you enjoy? That can sometimes lead you to, maybe these are the essential oils that I need. But what if you don't know? Or what if you're just starting out? Or what if you're just not, like, maybe you've tried some things and you're like, these are all weird. I don't really know if I like them. Polyvagal theory helps there as well. And there's, like I said, there's so much more to this. There's so much more nuance to this, but for the sake of like keeping this from being an 8-hour lecture, I feel like I'm trying to stick with just kind of like the basics of this polyvagal theory. If somebody is in a dorsal vagal response, remember that's your collapse, your shutdown, everything, the energy has left the building. In that moment, you need essential oils that are energizing and uplifting. So a lot of the times things like the citrusy oils, like your sweet orange, your lemon, your mandarin, that kind of thing. Some people really like woodsy type scents, pine, cedar, that sort of thing. Or then we have on the sympathetic side that the high energy, right? We've got too much energy in the system, either it's heat or just energy in general. And then we need things that are soothing, that can kind of help to bring everything back down. And for some people, this is going to be things like lavender and lang lang and one of the words is gone. There was another one that I was going to mention that's interesting. Spearmint. So peppermint kind of tends to be a little more energizing, but spearmint has that kind of cooling effect. So and this doesn't work necessarily perfectly for everybody. And this is one of the reasons that I'm always like, there is nuance to it. Neurodivergence can kind of change how that works. And sometimes depending on somebody's underlying traumas, it can flip-flop them as well. But for like 80% of the population, that's a good starting point. And like I was mentioning on that podcast, I use lavender as a really good example because a lot of people love lavender. But then there's also a lot of bath products now that are made with lavender. And so there's a lot of children and young adults and maybe older adults, but I see a lot of people now who it's almost like if they were in a neglected situation, but there were a lot of lavender products that can actually create a response. And then a lot of childhood trauma leads to that kind of collapse and shutdown, because the collapse occurs when we aren't in a position to be able to fight. We can't get out, we can't fight. Our body then turns to that collapse. So if that becomes the common trauma response, which happens for a lot of people who've been through some sort of childhood distress, lavender can actually cause them to feel even more subdued. And that can actually almost create like it's a very interesting response. Like, it's almost like you subdued to the point where all of a sudden your body starts trying to rebel and you become almost manic. So like, lavender is not perfect for everybody, but there are a lot of people who are in this fight or flight place with all this extra energy. And that lavender really helps to kind of bring them back to a place where they're able to feel safe enough to get into the ventral vagal space. And then, of course, sometimes lavender or another essential oil that you love can help you to stay in that ventral vagal space longer. Because one of the things that occurs, I'm getting a little off topic here, but
I'm following along.
One of the things that occurs when you've been through a lot of trauma, especially with complex trauma, is that you don't really have the space to hold feeling safe. The sense of safe enough is not a space that you're accustomed to holding. It does not feel safe to sit in a space that feels safe, because your body is still on the lookout for the danger, what's going to happen next, what's going to go wrong. So we really have to start expanding that capacity to stay in that safe enough place. And so the essential oils can really help with that when you find the right one for you.
First of all, I just want to plug your podcast. I know we'll talk more about it later, but Elizabeth has a podcast called the Trauma-Informed Herbalist.
Yes.
You can just search for that in your podcast player of choice, and a book along with the same name. So the Trauma-Informed Herbalist. But yeah, so I was wondering, say you're someone who deals with trauma, as we probably a lot of us do. And you're in one of those downward spirals. When you're not, say, in one of those downward spirals, and you're like in a really happy-go-lucky mood, you're feeling great. Is there a way, do you think you could like start using aromatherapy, like when you're in those good moods, start using certain scents, like become associating positive moods with this particular scent, and then when you're having one of those down moments, you're like, oh shit, I'm gonna run and go get the spearmint now, or something like that?
Yes. So it's very Pavlovian, but
that's what I was gonna, Pavlov's dog, right?
Yes, but that is something I do with some people. So like,
wow.
The thing is that a lot of people don't necessarily have those good moods that don't have caveats to them. Like if you've got a lot of complex trauma and things like that. But if you are in a place where you do have those downward spirals, but then you have days where you're like, I feel good, or maybe you've gone into the woods, right? And you come back out and you're like, yes, I'm in a good place. You can start creating a scent memory association with that. So one of the things that makes aromatherapy so powerful is that when you smell the essential oils, or really any scent, but I like focusing on essential oils because there's also physiological benefits to them. But when you smell an essential oil, the scent goes to your olfactory senses, which is directly connected to your limbic system. And the limbic system is the part of your body that really processes that fight or flight response, that sympathetic versus dorsal or ventral vagal. Like that's where it really processes it. So this is a double-edged sword, right? We get the wrong scent and it can set off a cascade of stress. But if we get the right scent, it can give a really quick, it can cut to the limbic system and give us almost like a shortcut to like feeling back in our body, feeling back where we're like, okay, we're all right now. And so if you are wanting to try this, it's not something you can do one time and call it good. You have to use this for several weeks. Find the oil that you like that feels, usually I'm looking for an oil that somebody likes, but they don't really already have a memory attached to the scent. And then once you're done with whatever good thing, you start feeling really good in that moment, take a whiff of the oil. I do this a lot with people in yoga. So like we'll do some yoga. They'll start really getting in the flow. They'll start feeling really embodied, really back to where they feel that resilience kind of sensation. And then we'll take a whiff of their blend. And then we do it again the next time, and we do it again the next time. And you do this over and over and over again. And after 4 or 5 weeks, you can test it when you are having a spiral and see, okay, I'm having a spiral today. I remembered the essential oil. Sometimes you don't remember. Once you're in a spiral, sometimes it's hard, right? But if you remember, go grab it, smell it, and see. See if that's enough to pull you out. I also do this with teas. It's just the essential oils, because of that limbic connection, tend to be a faster response, but teas can do the same thing. And you could do it with tinctures as well. I've just found that teas are very gentle and soothing. And because we have the smell of the tea, as well as like the warmth of the cup, you're adding in other senses to it. And it makes it for a really good embodiment practice as well.
Have you ever heard the Mike Tyson quote? I want to say, if I'm not butchering this, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. Yeah. And you were talking, and for some reason that came up. I'm like, I have all these plans that I'm going to do before I have my like freak out episodes or whatever. Right. And I'm like, oh, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. And I'm going to be so good next time. And but listening to you inspires me. I'm like, shit, I really want to get to the point where I'm like, I do want to train my brain to associate certain sense with positive feelings and give it a go. Cause I still smell certain synthetic perfumes that remind me of safe spaces when I was a child. And it's, even though it's not like legitimate plant essential oils, it's hypersynthetic and probably bad for you or whatever. I'm just like, I have these, I'm getting goosebumps right now just thinking about it. And it's, scent is a very, very powerful thing. And I would like to learn more about your Shift Summit class coming up here in a few. I'm not sure if it's involved with aromatherapy or not, but
before we get onto that though, I did want to say that while I do use essential oils most frequently and I prefer the more natural stuff, I do have some people who, like, I had one woman that it was a shampoo and that was what she used to help her get back. And it was an external resource is what we call it when we're trying to process through some of the nervous system things. And we used that for a little while until we found the right essential oil. So like those synthetic fragrances can be a stopgap. We just don't want to use them long term. But like, it's a thing. And you say this, there's a meme going around on Facebook right now about cucumber melon Bath and Body Works.
Oh.
And people are joking about like the scent, the team Japanese cherry blossom or team, whatever the others were. And like, it's very strong. Like that scent profile is very strong for people. And like, I was Japanese cherry blossom as a kid. and so like, there are people, they see that cucumber melon and it instantly brings them back. For me, it's the cherry blossom. Like it's a very strong thing. And so if you are in a place where it's like, I don't have the essential oils yet, or I don't know yet what's going to work, and you do have a scent of a, shampoo or something that does help, you can start with that. And then you can slowly make your steps over to the essential oils. That is an option. So I did want to just like mention that again, yes, synthetic, we don't want to be on it forever. But if that's where we can start to get somebody back to a place where they feel like they have the energy to get into a better spot, then that's where we start. So
great points. And I actually have been meaning to underline the whole example you gave about how lavender is on all these different body care products. And someone could start associating that with, like, say, a bad home life. And then their recall is, trauma and whatnot. And I'd never thought of that before. You're right, though. There's so many products out there that have lavender scent in it, and it just could be this negative association. But thank you for teaching us about aromatherapy and whatnot. I know another one of your specialties is I want to say somatics. So can you explain what somatic plant medicine practice is before we kind of get into your Shift network stuff?
Yes. So somatic plant medicine practices are essentially combining somatics with what the plants are doing for your body. Somatics comes from the Greek word soma, which is body. And the idea is that when we listen to the body, when we are noticing the sensations, not just the emotions, but the underlying sensations that tell us what those emotions are, then we are in a place where we're starting to decode the language of our nervous system. And like I said at the beginning, the nervous system is usually that root cause of imbalance after trauma. And so if we can start listening to the nervous system through somatics work, then we can start figuring out what we need, what will work best for us while we're trying to heal. Plant medicine gives us great external resources and gives us a lot of support that allows us to get into the ventral vagal space better. So when I say external resource, we have external resources and we have internal resources. Internal resources would be like a good memory of a good event, and then the sensations that come up for us and being able to really like latch onto those sensations. External resources are going to be like a fuzzy blanket that feels really nice, or in the case of essential oils, a smell that we really love. And why I love essential oils, again, there's phytochemicals in those oils that when we inhale, they absorb through the mucous membranes into our bloodstream. So we're also getting a physiological response from that, where there's actually like the linalool or the linalool acetate or whatever else gets into our body, helps our body to go, oh, okay, we can relax a little bit now. We can feel a little bit more soothed. And so those external resources, things like the essential oils, or maybe a physical tactile thing that feels nice, or a tea, or, you know, the right spice blend, whatever that looks like, those things can help us when the internal resources aren't there yet. Or when the internal resources are there, but maybe we're already feeling overwhelmed and those resources have shrunk a little bit and they're not as strong as they might be on a better day. The other reason that I really love plants for somatic work is that every time I work with a plant, I get a consistent response. Humans are a lot more mercurial, and I'm neurodivergent, so I love my plants. I love being in my garden, but I love my humans too. And there is a time and a place for that, right? But sometimes what is so necessary is for us to have something that we know when we work with this, we're going to have the same resonance every time. Whereas I might call my best friend, and if she's had a bad day at work, our resonance isn't going to be there. And I may feel like I need to be able to be in a safe place. She's over here needing to be able to vent about whatever's happened at her job. And so when we're going through a lot, especially when we're in one of those downward spirals, or maybe we're first starting to kind of climb back out of the trauma, because what happens is usually when you're going through it, you're making it, you're okay. And then the moment your body realizes that you're actually safe enough to begin the healing process, that's when it breaks down. Like that's when it gets bad. Having the consistent connection with your plant allies can really help to bring a sense of like, okay, I am safe enough. I am in a place where I can be a little bit more soothed so that I can begin the healing process. And sometimes we can get that from friends and family, but if we're really raw, it may not be a place where that reciprocal relationship with the friends and family is going to work. And that's where plants can come into play. So that's a lot of the work that I've been doing. And that's kind of, that's a good portion of what we're getting into with the Shift Network class.
Awesome. Do you see clients virtually?
Yes.
Awesome. How, if someone was listening and they're like, I like the somatic stuff, I like your aromatherapy stuff, and they want to work with you, how would someone get a hold of you to work with you?
If you go to Trauma-Informed-Herbalist.com and you scroll down, there's a button that says work with me one-on-one. That will take you to the page that gives you a little bit more description about what I do. I work on a month-to-month basis. So instead of paying me per session, you pay me for the month. And then we schedule what you need. We work together virtually or in person, depending on where you are. And it's a month-to-month service. So it's not like you're committed for 6 months. We just work together as you need. And yeah.
It's probably hard to teach yoga online.
It's really not that bad.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah,
do you do that too?
Yes. So
wow.
Now it would be if we were trying to get into a lot of the more advanced poses. I could see where that might be a problem, but the asana is only one limb of yoga. Yoga is actually just as much about the philosophy as it is the physical practice. And so a lot of the physical practices I do tend to be more gentle in nature anyway, because once you've been through trauma, or a lot of people I work with have autoimmune issues that were activated by going through something severe emotionally. And you don't want to overwork your body when you're dealing with that. So a lot of the stuff that I do is like chair yoga or gentle yoga flows. We don't get into a lot of like, we're not doing like headstands and things like that. We're less about twisting into pretzels and more about, I mean, and you know, legit, if that's what you want to do, go for it. But we're less about that and more about trying to notice what our body's asking for today. Do I need to use props to help me to get to a place where I really feel like I'm, you know, my breath is flowing well and I feel strong in this moment, instead of trying to achieve what can be beautiful poses. But a lot of the times, and again, like, I'm not trying to like put anybody down who loves that kind of thing, but like a lot of the times for those of us who are not naturally like willowy and don't necessarily get into those poses easily, a lot of the times the spirit of yoga is lost trying to achieve something that is Instagram worthy. So yeah, a lot of the yoga I do is very gentle. It's very different than trying to like use it as a sport.
I like your approach. That's my speed too. Also, I appreciate your vocab. You said mercurial and willowy. I like that.
Yes. I read a lot as a kid. It paid off.
I love it. Well, why don't you tell us about the Shift Network course that you're teaching? I just want to say we've collaborated with numerous Shift classes over the years now, and we're going to promote yours as well. But yeah, why don't you tell the audience about it?
Yeah, so it's the first thing that we're doing is a free online event. It's a workshop that's an hour long. It's coming up on, August 5th. Let me check my calendar.
Yeah,
I believe
sounds about right to me.
Sounds right. Let me double check, make sure I'm telling you guys right.
You also have like a free webinar associated with it, right?
Yes, that is the free. Yeah,
that's the thing. Okay, cool.
That's the free. Yeah, August 5th. Is the free webinar, and it's an hour long, and I've already recorded it. It's super, like, I am very excited for this to release. We talk a lot about tapping into different plant allies and getting into some of the more like somatic side of things. Like when I'm using a plant that I could use several different parts of the plant, noticing how one part affects me differently than another. So like mimosa, which down here we have Albizia julibrisson, and we use both the bark and the flowers. And the bark gives a different feel from the flowers. And so like just being able to kind of like touch in with your body and noticing what's occurring when you're using different parts of the plant, as well as different plants. We go into that a little bit. And then there's a quick visualization. It's about a 10 to 12 minute guided visualization that starts and ends with a little bit of somatics. And then we take a trip to gain a little bit of more insight from a plant ally.
Lovely. Well, we'll include a link to that in the podcast description, YouTube description, and whatnot. And yeah, if you enjoyed this interview, which I'm really loving it, Elizabeth, this was so many valuable takeaways. I'm excited to edit this so I get to re-listen to it.
Yeah.
Further ingrain the knowledge into my brain. But we still got a few minutes if you have time for some more questions.
Sure, let's do it.
Awesome. I want to say I heard you reference a book called The Body Keeps the Score, which I know is very popular. I was wondering if you could either describe it or do you ascribe to it? And do you have any other recommended resources kind of along the same lines of what we're talking about today?
Body Keeps the Score is a very interesting book. If you have a lot of trauma, it may or may not be a good book for you to read. The Body Keeps the Score is, the author is Dr. Bessel van der Kolk. And it is pretty much the book that starts this whole thing, right? Like this is the book that got people realizing how much their body is holding these traumas or these events. You know, I know we use trauma a lot, and I know a lot of people kind of feel like, ugh, trauma is so overused, but I think there's a lot more trauma in the world than people realize a lot of the times. But even if you don't see yourself as having a lot of trauma, maybe you've just been through a lot of difficult situations, or maybe there's been a lot of trials in your life. And then noticing where you're holding that in your body. Dr. van der Kolk is the first person that really popularized that idea. It's been there, right? I mean, even indigenous practices, when you look at a lot of the older practices that come from ancient, all over the world, right? I'm thinking of Celtic practices that I know from friends who are pagan and into that kind of thing. And then of course you have your Native American practices and things coming from, traditional Chinese medicine, but we have that already. But Dr. van der Kolk really popularized it in the more conventional stream, as it were, of stream of consciousness. We'll call it that. And it's a good thing, but the book itself has a lot of really activating discussions, and it was written for clinicians.
Oh,
yes. So I'm not saying don't go read it, yeah. But if you find yourself being activated by it, there are several other options. We don't have to stick with just The Body Keeps the Score. So for instance, I don't even know if this is going to be backwards or not. Oh, it's not.
No, it's not. Looks great.
This is The Deepest Well by Dr. Nadine Burke Harris. And it's talking about childhood trauma specifically, but this is a really fantastic book that I feel like is a little bit more gentle. I mean, there is still it is a little bit clinical, but it doesn't have the same harsh effect as some of Dr. van der Kolk's stories do. Because you have to remember, when he was writing that, he was writing it to really try to impress upon people how severe this was. And so some of the stories in there are just very activating for some people. So anyway, that's an option. There's also another book, if you're really interested in this kind of thing and you want to get into some exercises. Deb Dana has Polyvagal Exercises for Safety and Connection. This is a really good one that's got several different exercise options in it. She even talks about like going outside and noticing repeatable patterns. So the trees and things like that, fractal patterns, that's the word. Yeah. So she talks about that. I also like to call them predictable patterns, because even the birds around you, like if you can hear the birds and hear their songs, if you sit out long enough, you can kind of catch what they're going to do next, right? You can kind of catch when you expect them to sing again, when you expect them to make whatever noise they're making again. And Dr. Peter Levine has some books. He has the In an Unspoken Voice is my favorite one. Now he has Waking the Tiger, which is the more popular one, but his newer one, In an Unspoken Voice, I think is a very wonderful option for people to read, to understand a little bit more about how trauma works and how the body is holding it.
I will leave links to those in the show notes. Thank you for sharing. And when you say The Body Keeps the Score, you're saying that if someone is highly triggered by having extreme trauma from childhood, it might be not wise to read that book because it could just be too triggering or something like that. Yeah, not even necessarily from childhood. Like he describes war crimes. I see. And doesn't condemn them. And I have heard people say that really activated them. I was activated by a couple of the things that the soldiers admitted to doing. I see. And it didn't bother me so much that he didn't condemn it, because it is written for clinicians, but just like got a real strong visualization of what happened. So there are situations where you start reading the book and you may be like, ooh, this is a little too much. It's okay to put it down. But my main thing is if you want to read it, go read it. And a lot of people, it has really helped them. Like, it is a very good book. So again, this is like 80% of the population is really going to think, oh my gosh, this is amazing. This is fantastic. But if you've been through certain types of trauma and you start getting activated by it, you're not broken. It's just that book is very direct and very forward. And there are other options. And I really love Dr. Harris's book, The Deepest Well. Like, I really love this one. I think it's, she's just very well spoken. And like the book is, compared to some of the other books that I've read on trauma that get a little bit more vivid on things, she has figured out a real good way to approach some of this stuff that's helpful while also, touching. So I definitely love her stuff.
I'll see if she's got it on audio.
But in the meantime, I'll for sure leave links to those in the show notes. Well, like I said, this has been a super jam-packed episode. I'd like to kind of lighten it up a little bit and get to know Elizabeth a little bit more. So just a couple random questions. What is a random hobby of yours outside of all this stuff that we talked about today?
A random hobby. Yeah. I love archery. I'm kind of good at it. Yeah.
Wow. That's awesome.
Yeah. Big fan of it. And I am one of these people that I don't like the oh no, words are gone again. Recurve. Is it the recurve? No, compound. I don't like compound bows where you can pull it and hold it. I like my recurve that doesn't have the pulleys on it. Because to me, part of the art is learning how to hold that tension while aiming, where you lose that with the compound because like you pull it back, but then it releases the tension while you're trying to aim. So
so that's like you're doing it like the old school method then.
Yeah,
that's cool. Do you go to like the range and whatnot and shoot at targets? Or
so when we lived in Pelham, Oak Mountain State Park had an archery range.
That's so cool.
We don't really have anything here, but I've loved that for years. When I was a kid at a camp, I got into it. And then right after that, Lord of the Rings came out. And of course, Liz was like my best friend. I was like, yes. So
I love it. Well, we'll do a random question from the Let's Get Deep Friends edition.
Yeah.
As per tradition. Let's see what we got here. Oh, this is appropriate. What was the last book you read?
Oh, no. Gray Mountain, I think. Now let me Google it. It's a John Grisham novel. My husband's finally turned me on to Grisham.
Wow. He's prolific.
Yeah. I just know, I don't know. Like I guess I fancy myself, I don't know, artsy, but I never got into him. But no, Gray Mountain is the name of the novel. And it's really interesting because it's about the 2008 crash, right? And the woman was a lawyer in New York, and she moves down to, I want to say somewhere in Virginia. It might have been West Virginia. And she's fighting the companies that are strip mining the Appalachian Mountains. So it really has like hit, ooh, but it's a really, I loved it. It was a really interesting book.
So you read both fiction and nonfiction, I take it.
Yes. Now for nonfiction, because that's probably what people are actually interested in. Let me think for a second. What was the last thing I read?
I saw you got 2 books. You got one. Maybe this was an older post. Kat Meyer's Energetic Herbalism book.
Yes.
And then some other one I forgot.
Love Nature Magic by Maria. Cool. Yeah. Energetic Herbalism is one that I've been reading because I'm gonna do an article for the American Herbalist Guild. I also just finished Pascal Baldar's Wildcrafted Vinegars.
Oh, cool! Yeah, I've heard of him. I think we might even be friends on Facebook.
Yes,
but he seems like a rad dude.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And it's really interesting because a lot of his, of course, I think this is common for like the fermentation communities, but a lot of his work in this book is like a call to action to look around us at the local area and see what we have that can be fermented into, either like traditional ferments or like more the vinegar type things. Yeah. And of course, in this book, he's using like all kinds of cool stuff to make the weirdest relishes. And like at one point he talks about how he captured fruit flies to make a mother because they have certain bacteria that are really beneficial for humans. And so and of course, by the time it's done, it's not like you're eating fruit flies, right? But really interesting. So yeah, definitely a fan of that book.
Very cool. I bet the photography is pretty good in the book too. Yeah.
Beautiful. Yes.
Yeah, he's always got the best pictures. But awesome. Well, I really appreciate your time today and your vulnerability and your just ability to teach. I highly recommend the audience go check out this Shift Network class that Elizabeth is teaching. And again, let's plug your book and your podcast.
Yeah. So one more thing on the Shift Network class.
Oh, sure.
This is a free workshop, but then after the workshop, there is a 7-week series where we're diving really in depth into, the nervines and adaptogens, which are 2 different types of herbs that help with the nervous system, and then some flower essences and some essential oils, really trying to help you to
learn about the different things that I've seen be useful for people, and so that you can connect to the ones that are really your plant allies. So definitely encourage you to check that out. And yes, like I mentioned earlier in the podcast, the Trauma-Informed Herbalist podcast was created to kind of parallel my first book, The Trauma-Informed Herbalist. And I'm going to come out with a second season this fall called, it's going to be, the season 2 is going to be on essential oils for trauma, because my second book is essential oils for trauma. So I'm kind of just, as I release a book, I'll do a season that kind of parallels the book and maybe digs into some stuff we didn't get into the final edits. Yeah. And then again, both of the books are out and available. And I have been honored by the response I've received from people about the material. And in my mind, it's less about me saying, here are all the things you need to do, and more about, here's a call to action, because I am one slice of experience, and trauma is pervasive, and everybody's experience is unique and different. And if I can help you see, especially now, like we're kind of coming out of the chaos of the last few years, everybody's trying to kind of like reorient to where we are now. And if we can use this time to really kind of take charge and say, okay, I've been through a lot. I've got a lot of stuff going on. Here's how I'm going to like adjust my plans so that I come out a little bit more healed, so that then I can turn to my neighbor and start to help them however they need help, so that then our communities can start to rebuild, so that we can really come out stronger. Like, this is the time to do it.
I love your mission, Elizabeth. It's great work. And I also really love your style of podcasting. I think that's neat that you're doing a season per book. I guess you got a lot of books in you.
I'm working on the third one now. Yeah.
Well, that's awesome. So does that have to do with somatics or?
Yep. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yep. Starting to head in that direction. Right now the working title is Earth's Embrace. And it's a guide to connecting with plant allies through embodiment practices.
Love it. Yeah, you mentioned the feedback for the Trauma-Informed Herbalist has been really positive, and I've actually seen that publicly as well. I did want to say you publicly shared a bad review that you got, which I thought was hilarious. Someone said, I already know all this stuff, and I'm like, well, that's such a shitty. I don't know. I thought the whole thing was super funny, and you just kind of owned it. And we've gotten some negative comments now on the YouTube channel and whatnot, and I'm like, I guess that means we're getting out there, we're putting ourselves out there. Not everyone's gonna like everything we do, so but yeah, it was
funny.
Yeah, right.
Well, and I was just like, I saw that and I thought, I really want to meet this I mean, like, I know that to some extent they're probably brushing some of my stuff off, right? But like, if they really have that like in depth of a knowledge, I really want to meet them and just like chew the cud with them about stuff.
Right.
It's like, if somebody else has all of this in this way, like, I want to have that conversation with you. But it was funny because the other piece to that review, they were like, I already know all of this stuff. And then they were like, and then I tried to send the book back and they told me to keep it. And then they had like the shrug emoji, like, nah. And I was just like, I don't even know what to make of this. Like, I'm sorry you had to keep the book. You got your refund.
Just give it to someone who doesn't know everything.
Right. Stick it in a little library, like one of those little free public library things or something. Like, it'll be all right.
There you go. Awesome. Well, thank you once again, Elizabeth, for joining us on the Herbalist Hour. Any closing thoughts before we get out of here?
I'm really honored to be here. And I just want to say that, like, this work, again, like, in my mind, I don't own this, right? I mean, I own my herbal somatics protocol, but as far as like trying to connect with plant allies and really trying to understand the trauma-informed side of things and understand how we can be more compassionate towards each other and towards ourselves, to me, is so important. And I see a lot of people that struggle with that really struggle with like finding that compassion. And I struggle with it some days. Like, I really struggle to be compassionate with myself. And if you can find ways to really connect with the plants and to tap into that deeper sense of longing that we all have, almost that homesickness that occurs sometimes, if we can find ways to relate to the plants and connect with nature around us so that we're able to really pinpoint how to act and how to respond when we're starting to feel those sensations of not belonging or being out of our depth or spiraling down, like you mentioned, then we will go a long way towards healing.
Well said. Well, thank you once again, Elizabeth, and thanks to y'all for listening to yet another episode of the Herbalist Hour. We'll see you in the next episode.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey everyone, this is Mason with HerbRally. Thanks so much for watching today's video. If you liked it, please give it a thumbs up and also go ahead and subscribe. We come out with new herbal content each and every week. If you didn't know, HerbRally also lists herbalism events. We list herbalism events chronologically. We list them also by state. So you can just go ahead and search by Oregon or Wisconsin or wherever you live. You can find out what herbalism events are happening in your neck of the woods. We also list herbalism events, virtual herbal events. So if you can't make it to an in-person conference or plant walk, we list lots of virtual events as well. To find out more, you could go to herbrally.com/events or herbrally.com/virtual. But if you can help it, I would highly recommend trying to go to an herbalism conference. Those are some of the best learning experiences I've ever had, and that's where you can find different herbal teachers, and then maybe you could perhaps take their apprenticeship. But yeah, just do what you can. Get out there and learn about the herbs, you know, like yarrow, dandelion, corn, you know, all the above, like all the medicinal herbs. And we'll see you out there. Hope to see you at an herb conference. All right, bye.